The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage between Iran and the Persian Gulf, is one of the world's most important oil choke points. It's also the site of a 2016 incident that almost escalated into a major international conflict. But what exactly makes this strait so significant? And how did it come so close to sparking a war between the United States and Iran? This is the story of the Strait of Hormuz, Part 1. The importance of oil. It's hard to overstate the importance of oil in today's world. Virtually every country relies on it to some degree, whether for their own consumption or to generate electricity. For many countries, oil is even the backbone of their entire economy. In 2022, for example, it was responsible for around a quarter of the Iranian GDP. Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the countries of the wider Gulf Cooperation Council have been fighting a multi-year battle to keep the price of oil above $80 per barrel. Anything less means less revenue for these countries, which could destabilize their economy. One reason that oil is so valuable is because there's only a finite supply of it. Once it runs out, it's gone forever. This means that the countries with the biggest oil reserves are sitting on a literal gold mine. That's why the top 5 oil-producing countries in the world all lie either in the Middle East or just off its coast. The biggest oil reserves by far belong to Saudi Arabia, followed by Iran, the United Arab Emirates, Iraq, and Kuwait. Collectively, they control around half of the world's oil supply. The real value, however, comes from the ability to transport this oil around the world. In recent decades, several pipelines have been built to carry oil from the Gulf to major shipping lanes. But oil tankers can only travel so far inland. Eventually, they hit a wall. In this case, the Persian Gulf. The problem is, there's only one way out. Literally, the Persian Gulf is a saltwater sea that sits between Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Its shape is somewhat reminiscent of a T, stretching around 980 miles from west to east before emptying into the bigger picture via the Strait of Hormuz. This 21-mile-wide strait is the only passage out of the Persian Gulf. Everything coming in or out has to pass through it, including oil tankers carrying a quarter of the world's crude oil. Control over the strait is therefore critical, which is why it's become such a flashpoint for regional powers. Tensions rise. For centuries, the region surrounding the Persian Gulf was relatively stable. Sure, there were conflicts here and there, but nothing too serious. That all changed when it was discovered that beneath the sands of the Middle East lay some of the biggest oil reserves in history. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of the pie, especially the British and the Dutch. They fought several Anglo-Dutch wars in the 17th and 18th centuries to gain control of the spice trade. But it was the British who ultimately came out on top. They would go on to establish the British Empire in India and rule over much of the Middle East until the 20th century. The British were especially keen on maintaining stability in the region, not because they particularly liked the Arabs, but because they didn't want anyone else getting their hands on those oil reserves. After all, Britain was undergoing something of an industrial revolution. Having access to cheap fuel was essential to maintaining its position as a global superpower. So while they were never able to completely control the region, they did manage to keep things relatively stable until after the Second World War, when the U.S. took over. The new Cold War rivalry between America and the Soviet Union meant that having access to the oil fields of the Middle East was more important than ever. Unlike the British, the Americans had no interest in ruling over the region directly. Instead, they preferred working behind the scenes to install friendly dictators like the Shah of Iran and various emirs across the Gulf. These leaders might have been autocratic and corrupt, but they kept the oil flowing. However, in 1979, the Shah was overthrown in a popular revolution and replaced with the This was bad news for America, not least because Khomeini was a vocal critic of the U.S. and Israel. and openly called for their destruction. But it was the closure of the Strait of Hormuz in 1980 that really got America's attention. Tensions between Iran and Iraq were already high following the Iran-Iraq War and Saddam Hussein saw the revolution as an opportunity to once and for all end Iranian influence in the region. He began by seizing 3 islands in the Strait of Hormuz, effectively blockading them from Iranian forces. Then on September 22, 1980, Iraqi fighter jets bombed Iranian vessels attempting to relieve the islands. This marked the beginning of a 6-year war. What started as a local conflict quickly turned into a full-blown regional crisis, as both sides laid mines in the Strait of Hormuz and attacked any ships that entered it. By 1984, the strait had effectively been shut down. Oil prices spiked and several major oil tankers were sunk. The fighting only ended when the UN intervened and forced both countries to sign a ceasefire. America flexes its muscles. While the 1980s Iran-Iraq War may be long over, the threat of another conflict has lingered. In 2012, for example, Iran threatened to shut down the Strait of Hormuz again in response to new economic sanctions. They didn't follow through. But it is clear that shutting down the strait would be a powerful weapon for Iran to wield against the West. Then in 2016, tensions boiled over. On January 2nd, an Iranian Revolutionary Guard speedboat approached the USS Mason destroyer in the Strait of Hormuz. The ship tried to hail the boat, but it kept approaching and eventually reached within 50 yards. The U.S. fired warning shots and then stunned the Revolutionary Guardsmen with a powerful water cannon. While nobody was injured, the incident caused a diplomatic storm. Iran summoned the U.S. ambassador and demanded an explanation. The U.S. stood firm, though, and even considered further military action. In the end, cooler heads prevailed, and the incident was referred to the UN. But it goes to show just how close the two countries came to a major conflict. As we'll see in part 2, thankfully, things didn't escalate further. But the incident does raise an important question. How likely is it that the Strait of Hormuz will be shut down again? And if it is, how will the world cope? Coming up next week, the Strait of Hormuz, part 2, the threat of closure.